Ken Volkmer returning your call.
Hi, how are you, sir?
I am doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. Just dealing with this very confusing story at this point.
It is super confusing. I think there's been a lot of miscommunication and a lot of people talking through instead of to each other.
Okay, which brings up a question. Larry Vincent said he hasn't talked to anyone from the county attorney's office prior to being told that the deal had been rescinded due to liability.
So I can tell you we're making every attempt to remedy that. I know that we're going to have a large meeting, potentially additional conversations. So I think there has been, messages that have been misconstrued. I can tell you I don't personally have any animosity towards the chief or any of their volunteer members. In fact, I personally and collectively were supportive of what they're trying to do. I think there's just been some miscommunication and a failure to really sit down at the table collectively, and we're in the process of remedying that.
Well, let's start with what we do know is that the letter of concurrence was signed in March 2021 between the Pinal County and the Volunteer Fire Service through the Pinal County Sheriff's Office. That was signed.
That is accurate.
Also, that there would be a 30-day written notice if any party pulled out.
That is accurate as well.
The Volunteer Fire Department says they received no 30-day notice, written or otherwise.
I can tell you that when we looked at our records and we looked at county records, there was a letter that was drafted. It was believed to be sent out, but because of clerical error, it in fact never was sent out. So they're being honest.
Okay.
They're correct. I'm not suggesting they're not honest. That was a mistake on the county's part. We are obligated to send a letter. We did not send the letter. Believed it was sent out. It was drafted. It was prepared. It was authorized. It just never actually got sent.
Now, the other issue that came up that he talked about was that he was told no one knew they existed. And at the Board of Supervisors meeting, he offered his FDID number and everywhere they are registered, and that the State Fire Marshal's office had even given them scholarships to take certain training. How do you respond to that?
Janet, with all due respect, I'll answer your question, but realize I'm not trying to perpetuate a fight with them.
No, I know that. What I want to know is this true? Is it accurate that he was told they couldn't be found anywhere?
No, I don't believe that is completely accurate, but I believe he was speaking he had 3 minutes to speak. Mm-hmm. He was trying to condense a very complicated issue. So what he said verbatim, no, I don't think that's accurate. However, the point that he was making is fairly accurate, and that is that we didn't have all of the records. That when we first said, who are these people? We don't even have anything regarding them speaking about us. We didn't say they didn't exist. We didn't pretend like they're not real. The county had given them money, but he was very frustrated. I understand his frustration. That's why it's a better communication that we sit down and speak directly with him and his team, as opposed to somebody trying to interpret our words in a very complex, very complicated issue with a million moving parts and a lot of people saying this, and it ends up getting condensed or ends up getting summarized. It's not conducive to 3-minute sound bites.
Right, and I understand that, but again, it was said in a public forum, so that's what the public knows. So we're
working to address that. I mean, you heard Supervisor Kavanaugh. I believe Supervisor Surdy was supportive to it. I had to step out at one point, but I believe that they called for, at the end of that board meeting, after most people had left, that there would be an open public meeting next Wednesday. There had been for quite some time. In fact, the day of the fire, there was a meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, immediately following the board meeting that was going to be a private meeting where everybody was coming together. That was the first available time that all of the necessary parties had availability, which included the chief. It included 2 of our supervisors. It included myself. It included our sheriff. It included all the people that are required from the sheriff's office to put them on the radio system. That was the first available date, so we actually had something scheduled, and that predated the board meeting. However, based on the public outcry, which was justified and righteous, we've actually expedited it to the morning, and it'll be a public hearing. At least that's that is what the request is. Now, I don't know if it's been firmed up yet, but...
Because I know they discussed putting it on the agenda for May 4th meeting. Are you saying that there could be an earlier meeting?
No, that would be the meeting I'm referencing. May 4th is next Wednesday. There was a meeting scheduled for 1:30. It had been on my calendar since the 19th. They're now putting that on the agenda item and bringing it to the morning, as opposed to keep having it at 1:30 that same afternoon. Okay.
So, due to clerical error, they didn't get the 30-day written notice. That is a fact. One thing is, why was the steel rescinded?
So there's a combination of factors. What happened is there were community complaints to the sheriff's office about the South Florence Volunteer Fire Department unlawfully coming onto their property. There were complaints about some of them having criminal records and some intimidation tactics. There was a request by some of those residents to have some of South Florence's volunteer firefighters arrested.
Mm-hmm.
We were not comfortable doing that.
Okay.
But we did say, boy, what's going on with this? Well, let's look at this organization. And when we reached out to our state fire marshal and we started looking through our records, we discovered that we didn't have the certifications that we would traditionally expect to see. We discovered that we did not have the insurance records that we would traditionally expect to see to make sure that they were above board. We did not have any information internally that would distinguish them as a registered and appropriate fire department from a group of individuals that are, just having fun on a Saturday night.
Okay.
Without having those records, we were very concerned. We then reached out to them and asked them for their records. Again, the letter should have been sent. Unfortunately, the letter was not sent. I don't have a defense. Now, to say that they weren't made aware, I think is disingenuous, but they were not sent a formal letter, which is what the law requires. We did not send that. But they were told. They had conversations with numerous people at the sheriff's department. They were advised that they were going to be taken off until we could get the information. We know that because on March 9th, they did send us, after they were removed, they did send us a copy of their insurance and also send additional emails saying, hey, we're trying to get the records that you guys are asking. And at one point, they gave us a bunch of information. Before we could process it, before we could sit down with them, before we could have a meaningful conversation, regrettably, this fire at the Hetzel's residence occurred. And I say this with all sincerity. Truly, this is a tragedy. It was one of those things that people were working on. It wasn't trying to put people off, and this fire just occurred at the most inopportune time. It wasn't a priority for everybody to get this done, and unfortunately, we had people in our community that suffered as a result.
So they were providing you the information, and you were planning on getting together and going through everything.
Yeah, so I don't dispute what the chief said. The chief said, we gave him three, I believe his sentiment, and I don't have it in front of me, but I believe he said something, we gave him 3 paragraphs worth of information about all the trainings and certifications that they had completed.
Right.
I'm not disputing that they gave that to us, but we don't need it in narrative form. We need copies of the trainings and certifications. We need to know who actually completed those. There's some other things that we needed, and we were in the process of going through and sort of sussing out what needs to be and what doesn't need to be provided. I know that's their frustration, and I get that it's their frustration. That their comments to us have been, just tell us what you need from us. And that's what we're in the process of getting to them. That's what my hope is. On Wednesday, we will be able to give them a clear path to get everything that we need to get them on. Because, look, that area of our community needs that. Mm-hmm. I'm in the business of public safety. That is my obligation as the county attorney. But that obligation of public safety runs 2 ways. We have to be able to validate and verify who these people are. Because if they're, and I'm not saying they are, but if they were a bunch of murderers, a bunch of child molesters, a bunch of armed robbers, and the county says, go onto this property, and our sheriff's office provides security while they go in and ransack a home, the county's going to have liability. So there is a level of verification that we must meet to ensure that they are who they say they are, that they can be afforded the opportunity to go onto people's property with the authority of the government. Because remember, when you go onto somebody's property, you're going on without necessarily that person's consent. If they're not there, if it's the neighbor's yard and they're going on there, you are violating somebody's personal property rights. You are trespassing on their property, and they're using the power of the government to say, I have the right to trespass on your property. That's a very serious power that we're vesting in people, and we need to make sure that who we're empowering to do that is somebody that's trustworthy and worthy of that, because we owe that to the community as well.
Okay, so you hold this meeting, everyone brings the documents that they need, they describe what happened with the 30-day notice. How does that answer the question of the concerns that people have been giving to the sheriff's office?
Are you regarding like their behavior and all of that?
Yes, yeah.
That's part of what we're going to talk is what our expectation is. Some of those things are just training issues. Mm-hmm. So some of them they're just overstepping their bounds, and without knowing more details about it, it appears to us that is just a lack of training for some of them. Again, I don't think these are evil people doing bad things. These are people that are going out and asking people like, hey, do you have a burn permit for that? I understand why they'd want to do it. They're doing it because they believe they're keeping their community safe. The problem is you don't have a legal authority to go into somebody's property and demand that they provide you paperwork. And that's just merely a training issue. And again, I'm not faulting them. They're a startup organization, but that's what we want to look at. What training have people done when we're seeing these issues? What training or lack of training do the people that are, perpetuating these issues, what training do they need so we can get a roadmap? I mean, that's really what we're looking for. My genuine hope is by Wednesday we can say, hey, once you do X, Y, and Z, we can put you on there and this is the bet. It doesn't mean everything's going to be resolved, but then you can start doing follow-up and we can continue to assess to make sure that people are safe. Because again, the fire is absolutely tragic, but it would be no less tragic than if one of these people were a serial molester, the government told them to go on the property and went in and raped, an elderly woman who was sleeping in their bed. Again, I'm not suggesting that's going to happen, but that we have to prepare for those worst-case scenarios. We don't know who these people are. We cannot give them the power of the government. Everybody else has got fingerprint clearance cards. They have all of the stuff that we know, so we know who they are.
And you don't have that from this fire department?
Not yet.
Okay.
But in their defense, we've not demanded that explicitly because we've not had the conversation. Instead, we spent so much time, with all due respect, talking to you and the media on the phone going back and forth. We've not had the opportunity to sit down and have that face-to-face. Again, as soon as the fire occurred, we immediately set a meeting. It just took about 2 weeks, and then this thing is obviously blown up. And I understand why. But that's part of the conversation. I have every confidence that if I sit down and I say, hey, Chief, we need fingerprint clearance cards. This is the standard for volunteer fire departments. If it is, this is the standard. This is the standard for all of our fire departments, that they're going to comply. But they've not been specifically given that information because we've not had the opportunity to sit down and have the conversation. So it is truly a lack of communication. It's not an ill will on anybody's part.
So it's a lack of communication and something unfortunate happened in between.
Absolutely. In the worst possible time. Because the reality is, Janet, if this had happened, if the fire had never occurred but all of this stuff was going on, nobody would have thought twice about it. Mm-hmm. It's but for the tragic incidences of Tuesday the 19th. But for that, this would have never risen to this level, would never been an issue. Because it's not uncommon for there to be squabbling, for there to be a bureaucratic morass that it takes a little time to make sure all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed. We're in that process. It's just there's been a tragedy that's occurred in that interim, and that's horrible. I'm not defending it. Certainly there's no pride. Certainly I'm not happy about it.
Right. So one of the other issues they brought up were that neighbors with water trucks wanted to get on the property, were welcomed onto the property, but weren't allowed onto the property to help fight the fire. And that in the past, that had been allowed. Even before this volunteer fire department came up, in the past it had been allowed.
I don't have the specific details, but what I can tell you is law enforcement, their priority is human life. And if the on-scene officer makes a determination that the property is already gone and that allowing people on scene would jeopardize their lives or their well-being. They do have the ability to say you can't go on your property. You can actually do that to a homeowner. It's not uncommon that it happens where there's a house fire and perhaps there's a cat that's still in there and the homeowner's like, I need to go get that cat. Law enforcement will not allow that person to go back in the home because it jeopardizes that person's life. I don't know exactly in this case, but that would be my expectation or assumption that law enforcement made the decision at this point the fire was too far out of control to allow people to go onto the property, created a greater risk to human life, and it was not their determination at the time was it was not worth it to risk somebody's life for that.
Because apparently,
my understanding is it was hours later.
It was hours later that they showed up, the neighbors?
That was my understanding.
Okay.
My understanding is it was quite some time before people with the people with the water trucks and all of that. Law enforcement showed up almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know that there was some calls. I guess almost immediately is a term of art. My understanding is deputies did respond, but the people with additional water, I believe that there was a longer gap in time before they showed up. Again, I can't tell you specifically because I've not seen a police report.
Right.
But I can just talk in generalities. If the on-scene commander, the person that's in charge of the scene, determines that too great of a risk exists to allow people onto the property, they have the ability to say, you have to stay off the property. I understand you're here for a good reason. I understand you want to save a dog's life, a cat's life, a horse's life, but human life is inherently more valuable than animal's life, and we cannot allow you to risk your life for that of an animal.
Okay, because that was a big sticking issue with a lot of the neighbors saying that before the volunteer fire department, it was an ad hoc helping your neighbor type of thing, and they felt that they were prevented from doing that.
Yes, my question is though was law enforcement, was SO out there? Because law enforcement, police officers are always going to have that duty to protect a human life. So, I mean, if they go out there before law enforcement's out there, before the police are out there, I have no idea. If they believe the property can still be salvaged and it can be safely addressed, they can allow them on there. But when the decision is made that, you know, the property can't be saved, or the risk is too great to human life, they have the ability to stop it. Even if everybody wants to pitch in, because, again, our job is public safety. And obviously I never want to see anybody's house burned down. I never want to see anybody's property destroyed. I never want to see anybody's animals and livestock and livelihood potentially destroyed. But we value human life in our statutes collectively as more valuable, and our focus and our attention is on preserving and saving human life.
And obviously these comments that we were given at this point are anecdotal. One being that there had been a fire and sheriff's officers were there and allowed neighbors to go on. The other accusation that was made, and again, these are just, this is, I think, one or two people saying that the sheriff's deputies were laughing. Is that something that's going to be addressed as well? The behavior, if there was any of that behavior?
What I can tell you is if that occurred, that's certainly inappropriate.
Okay.
Look, our sheriff, nobody's going to defend laughing at people.
Right.
What my hope is that there was some other comment, that they weren't laughing at somebody's plight. Mm-hmm. There's no way that I could defend that. There's no way that the county would defend that. There's no way anyone would defend that cruel and callous behavior. Whether it happened or not, I don't know. The reality is we'll never really know. And if they did laugh, what were they actually laughing at? Mm-hmm. Again, in no way am I defending it, but if they've been sitting there for 2 hours and it's been burning, to have a conversation and somebody to smile by the wrong people, it could be misinterpreted, and it had nothing to do with the actual fire itself. It had no intention and in no way minimized the tragedy that occurred. It was just something unrelated, and after a while you're conversing about other things. My hope is it was something along those lines, that it wasn't the cruel and callous laughing at somebody's plight that was described. And look, if that happened, then those 18 or so people that spoke yesterday had every right to be outraged and to voice their frustration. And I have every confidence that if in fact that happened, that our sheriff would appropriately take the action necessary to redress that and to ensure that those type of behaviors don't happen again.
I understand the Florence Police Department, at least one unit was out there as well and had dash cams and body cams on. Is that going to be requested?
didn't know that. But second, so this is my first impression. There's not a criminal allegation, so I won't be requesting it.
Okay.
Whether the sheriff, and I mean, that's a question for the sheriff because that's a personnel issue for them.
Mm-hmm.
He certainly could, but I don't know what he's going to do.
Okay.
You know, he's his own constitutionally elected official. He runs his office in the manner that he deems appropriate. We obviously provide legal advice to him and his team. But when it comes to discipline, that's exclusively within his purview and his discretion.
Okay, so you weren't made aware that the Florence Police Department had a unit out there as well?
No, but in reality, I'm not normally advised of this.
Right.
I mean, if it's criminal and there's felony submission or even misdemeanor submission, there were charges, then we would be getting a police report with all of that relevant information. When it is a fire like this and there's no suspected criminal behavior, it's not suspected arson, it wasn't due to some bad behavior, there's not a police report that's ever submitted to our office, so we never review it or are never aware of all the facts. So the fact that I wasn't told that is not surprising. In fact, it would be more surprising if I was told that information and had it than not.
Okay. So Larry Vincent claims no one has reached out to him from the county attorney's office since the fire. Is that a correct assertion?
I can tell you that I have not personally reached out to him, so I don't know the answer to that, but I believe the county has reached out. I guess, let me be careful how I phrase this, but I think that sometimes that there's a genuine confusion as to what my responsibility and what my role is. Mm-hmm. So I'm the legal advisor to the sheriff, and I'm the legal advisor to the board. Having sicking your attorney on somebody oftentimes is not well received. Mm-hmm. So I don't have a horse in this race, so to speak. I have clients that are involved.
Right.
So, you know, the idea, there's this concept that I personally am the one that yanked them off of the 911 list. That's not really the way things work. What happens is I give legal advice, and my office provides legal advice about what you can and cannot do legally and what the implications are. And then the individual elected officials or department heads then make a decision based on the information that's provided to me. So I know everybody's angry with me and everybody thinks it was Kent that said get them off there. That's not what happened. That's not how it works.
Right. I'm familiar with this thing. It's a breadcrumbs. Somebody came to you and asked for a recommendation. You gave a recommendation and then they acted on it.
I would say it wasn't a recommendation. They asked for legal advice and said, can we?
Okay.
And they said, what happens if we do? And that's where the conversation went.
Okay.
So look, at the end of the day, if they were uncomfortable, we would tell them to take them off. If given the circumstances, there were complaints, we were not able to verify insurance, we were not able to verify stuff, we have to be, when we dispatch somebody, when we use the power of the government to send somebody with the power of the government onto your property, we have to be confident in who they are, and if there's a question, I would rather err on the side of caution. Again, had this fire never occurred, that would have never been an issue. But what I was getting to, though, is are we directly reaching out? I know that our supervisors have respectfully reached out, and I believe that our sheriff's department, the two much more involved parties, have reached out. My job is to facilitate legally whatever resolution they want to come to. I don't independently say this is what's going to happen.
Right.
That's not my role in this case. Again, you said you understand, and I'm not trying to you know.
No, I mean, I understand. I've covered county governments in much larger counties than this, so I know you're not anybody's personal attorney except the county. That's a job. It's like the attorney general. They're not the president's personal attorney.
Correct. Correct. Great analogy. I like that.
So, with that being said, I know Mr. Vincent is meeting with Sheriff Lamb today. Okay. Perhaps that will have some clarification. But basically now it all comes down to that May 4th meeting and trying to straighten everything out and say this is what we need. Them saying we have this already.
Right.
That kind of thing.
I'm not trying to spoil your plan here, but my hope is that May 4th is a very, very dull, very boring, very uneventful meeting, because we will have already come to an agreement, and we can just publicly tell the people, this is what's happened. This is what our expectation is. They've agreed to meet our expectation, and when this happens, they will go back on. My hope is that it is, a pronouncement of, hey, government works. It was slow. We had a Judge Hank Day, who used to jokingly say, we may not be good, we may not be smart, but we're slow. I'm talking about the government. And again, it is, I don't want to make light of it because of the tragedy that happened. I mean, we did have, 2 residents of our community lose their home.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're now homeless. My understanding, after, speaking with Supervisor Kavanaugh, they don't have insurance.
Right.
This is a family, but for the grace of God, the community stepped up and provided for them, so they're, not sleeping in a tent right now. So I don't want to in any way minimize what happened to them or minimize the tragedy. But I will tell you that we are working to have a satisfactory resolution that protects everybody, because that's our obligation.
Okay. So I guess that's it right now. As I said, I'm trying to wade through the he said, she said, they said that I'm getting from various news reports and Mr. Vincent and Kavanaugh. And so I just wanted to get your voice and what your role is actually. That you're not the one who sits there and says, demands off with their heads. That's not your job.
Correct. And look, I'm not trying to say I had no role in it, so don't misunderstand me. But what I'm saying is we have been painted as these antagonistic, opposing forces that are in some sort of battle or some sort of fight. And that is simply not accurate. What we're trying to do is we're trying to come to a resolution. Obviously, they're a volunteer firefighting organization. Most of these people have full-time jobs. I know the chief has a full-time career. He does this part-time. So we're trying to balance getting the information we need with overwhelming them. Like, we could give them a list of a gazillion different things, and if they didn't have jobs and this was their full-time job, it'd be much easier. But instead, these are people who are volunteering their time. They're not being compensated for what they've done. So we are really trying to work together with them. And unfortunately, I was reticent to even take this interview because I'm tired, not of you, but just generally, I'm tired of, I say something in the media and they take what they think is the most sexy part and they put that and publish that. And then they go talk with Larry and they take what they think is the most, antagonistic comment that Larry makes, and then they ping us back and forth off each other. Mm-hmm. And it's not a good way to do business. Even though I'm a politician, even though I'm elected, my job is to make the county run smoothly. My job is to ensure public safety in our community, to make sure that the county gets adequate and appropriate legal advice, and to make sure this county works smoothly. And dealing with really delicate issues like this through media comments is not the best way to do it. However, I don't think it's fair to you that we stonewall you and just say, well, we're not even going to talk with you, because, quite frankly, you are closer to the people, and your distribution are the people that are most interested in this. Mm-hmm. Channel 15, everybody listens, but the majority of the listeners in Channel 15, they don't care. It's South Florence. They don't even know where that's at. They don't really care too much about it. Like, oh, that's stupid government being stupid again. But the people that are reading your publication are the people in our community whose lives are impacted by this. So that's the reason that I want to have a conversation with you, but it's also really important that we get this right, that we're not antagonistic. It's not the county versus the South Florence Volunteer Fire Department. That is not the take anybody should get from this.
This just seems to be a situation of I don't want to use tragic errors, but more like, well, the error of not the letter not having been sent out. That's one, and then asking for information, and in between getting all of that information and stuff straightened out, a home burned down.
Yes, I agree with you. What happened is this was never, anybody's number one priority. It was something on everybody's list to get done. Mm-hmm. And in the interim, somebody's house burned down, and that's awful. Okay. Obviously, every single party, I can say with absolute certainty, at least on the county's part, and I'm pretty confident on the chief's part, if we could go back 3 weeks ago and we knew that this was going to happen. This would be everybody's priority.
Right.
And we would have had everything in line. But it was just one of those where, we'll send an email, and then there's a week or two that's response. I mean, we're really talking about less than 10 weeks. From the start of these complaints where like, hey, they wanted to know what can happen, to the house burning down, actually it was 9 weeks.
Okay.
And there was, emails kind of back and forth, and it took some time. I mean, it was less than 6 weeks from the time that they were taken off of the list that the fire occurred.
And government grinds slowly.
Regrettably, yes.
Yes.
I wish I could tell you we were nimble. I wish I could tell you that we were outstanding, and we're not. Because we err on the side of safety and caution, because we need to make sure everything is right because of liability and other reasons, there are a lot of I's that need to be dotted and a lot of T's that need to be crossed, and a lot of I's and people that are involved and have their hands in this. And in this case, it caused things to go slow. We need to be better. I'll concede that. We as a government need to be more responsive, and that's why, again, Wednesday, and our hope is prior to Wednesday that we'll have most of this already figured out.
And just so you know, because the Florence Fire Department and the Florence Police Department were dragged in through the comments, I've gone to them and asked them what is your commitment? Where is the line? Where can't you go? What agreements are done and not done? Simply because somebody said, why didn't the Florence Fire Department come in? Why? It's not their jurisdiction. So what I'm trying to do is just make sure I've talked to everybody who's on the board right now, and not board of supervisors. I'm talking about the board of this situation.
Right, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, and my hope is that, my genuine hope is that you are getting a feel that this really is antagonistic. Again, I can tell you I had no animosity towards them. I have no ill will towards them. Even though I was sort of personally attacked, I understand their frustration. And look, these are people that feel that they've been wronged. They're tired. You said how slow government moves. People are tired of it, and I get that. We're doing everything that we can, and I get their frustration. I respect their frustration, and my hope is that we can have an adequate resolution that makes sure that they are protected moving forward.
And that's why I called you, because I'm getting plenty of reaction from the other side, and just to print that without any context or without any response from you is not right.
I appreciate that.
So next Wednesday, the big day.
Correct.
Okay.
Again, I'm really hoping that it's anticlimactic. I'm hoping we've got everything resolved. But I believe, ultimately our chair has to put that agenda item on the agenda. It is his discretion as a board member. But as he now has a keen interest in that area, my guess is he would be willing to do so.
Okay. Yeah, and he said in the Monday Zoom meeting with, I think, 76 people signed on, that he was going to put it on the agenda.
Supervisor McClure did, Chairman McClure?
Oh, actually, it was Kavanaugh. He was going to ask for it to...
Kavanaugh made the request.
Kavanaugh made the request.
Kavanaugh did make the request. And Surdy said, yes, I support it 100%. But just the way that our board works, it's technically our chairman that sets the agenda. Mm-hmm. So they can make the request, but the chairman can say, look, I don't think it's ripe yet. He potentially could put it off. So it would really be whether Chairman McClure ultimately believes that it should be put on the calendar. It really falls to him. But again, he is starting... I believe it's July 1st, will now represent that area. So he has an acute interest in making sure that there's adequate resolution. Again, it was Chairman McClure, not Supervisor Kavanaugh, on the day of the fire that reached out to me and said, Kent, we need to meet ASAP. And because of some just quirks in scheduling, they gave me a couple different dates, and the first dates that everybody was available was actually, in fact, May 4th. So by lunchtime, the day of the fire, we had already had a meeting scheduled with all the necessary and relevant parties.
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to add that you figure we haven't covered or that you think the public should know?
The only thing I want to clarify is I gave you some examples that are very egregious examples of child molesters or rapists. I'm in no way attempting to disparage or say anything ill or negative about the volunteer firefighters. That is certainly not my intention. What I'm saying is I don't know who they are. The county doesn't know who they are at this point. on some complaints, we have a further obligation to work on it. They have done nothing wrong. The chief is not at fault here. So I don't want this coming across saying, well, they didn't do this, and they didn't do this, and they didn't do that. Mm-hmm. We have not done, as a county, as a community, we have not done a good enough job sitting down and having frank and candid conversations.
Okay.
And we're going to rectify that, and we strive to get better moving forward.
Okay. Well, I think I have what I need so far, and we'll see what happens May 4th.
I appreciate it. Take care.
Take care, yourself, and I understood what you were talking about with molesters and stuff like that. It was, an exaggeration of a situation that could happen, not anything. I'm not going to say the volunteer fire department has molesters on its staff.
Thank you. That was my concern.
No.
That would the way things have been going. That seems like that would be, if I said that to another journalist, that would be the thing that they lead with, and I would just be like, great, that was certainly not the context of my conversation, so I appreciate your understanding.
I've been doing this for a long, long time with a lot of city government, so I understand that it was just kind of an exaggeration of a situation that's never happened, that hasn't happened.
Right. Correct.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your help.